Welcome to the MontCAS Test Security and Data Integrity video series. The purpose of this video is to provide the viewer with more information on accommodations, identifying students eligible for the alternate assessment, and where to find OPI's guides on inclusion. This video will explore these three objectives so the viewer can complete this training with the following understandings. Who are the students we are talking about? There are 13 disability categories that are defined by IDEA. About 13% of the student population in the U.S. are students with disabilities. This chart represents the percentage distribution of children who are served under IDEA. Let's discuss the largest portion of students in this chart. 35% of students with disabilities are students with specific learning disabilities. A specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations. These students are not students with intellectual disabilities, meaning they have normal or even high IQs. With appropriate instruction, students with learning disabilities are able to overcome the challenges presented. In addition to the ESSA participation requirements, the Reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1997 requires that all students with disabilities be included in statewide assessments. The ESSA also requires states to reinforce the accessibility of assessments through appropriate accommodations for students with disabilities and, to the extent practical, incorporate principles of universal design for learning for all required assessments. Participation options for students with disabilities. Participate in general population assessments with or without accommodations. Participate in alternate assessments when the participation criteria are met. There are several standard facets of test administration that, if not executed properly, can lead to a test incident and/or bias or distortion in the interpretations and inferences that can be made about test scores. One example of the facets of test administration is accommodations. Accommodation. Changes in the procedures or materials that increase equitable access during assessment and generate valid assessment results for students for whom there is documentation of need on an Individualized Education Program, IEP, a 504 plan, or an English Learner Plan. Presentation accommodations allow students to access instruction in ways that do not require them to visually read standard print. Examples are visual, tactile, auditory, visual and auditory. These accommodations are best used by students with print disabilities or with difficulty or inability to visually read standard print, and can include students with physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. Response accommodations allow students to complete assignments, tests, and activities in different ways. Here are some examples. Students who use response accommodations are students with physical, sensory, or learning disabilities. Accommodations that change the allowable length of time to complete assignments and assessments, and may also change the way the time is organized. Here are some examples. The types of students who would need timing and scheduling accommodations are students who may have supports that will extend the time it takes to complete assignments and assessments. Students who have concentration issues or who have limited ability to focus for longer periods of time. Changes in the location or conditions of instructional and assessment setting. Here are some examples. Students that need a separate setting to reduce distractions if they need accommodations that would be distracting to others or to increase physical access. Standard accommodations are determined on an individual basis and should be used in the classroom at least 3 months prior to statewide assessments. Standard accommodations and universal tools do not change what is being tested. There is no impact on the validity and use of the test score. They maintain high expectations, reduce barriers, and level the playing field. Standard accommodations do not create an unfair advantage and do not override standard administration of an assessment. Accommodations not routinely approved for MontCAS assessments that are described in a student's IEP 504 or EL plan. A request should be made for these non-routine administrations through the MontCAS application non-routine request process. Non-routine accommodations or accommodations that are being administered improperly can change what is being tested. The student's score may be considered invalid and the result in the student being considered as a non-participant when calculating non-participation rate for the OPI accountability process. There is a lot to consider when thinking about how each student should participate in assessments, but we have prepared some Montana statewide assessment accountability resources to make this process easier to navigate. These guidelines are on the OPI website under Leadership, Statewide Testing, Test Participation and Eligibility, and Assessment-Specific Guidance within each summative assessment zone. Yvonne Field is the Assessment and Accountability Specialist who can help answer questions about accessibility and meaningful participation in the statewide assessments. In addition, there is a new Test Coordinator Academy, which includes videos from assessment literacy to policy and procedures for each of the 6 statewide assessments. We are here to help. You can contact the Assessment Help Desk for your questions. Now please take a moment to complete these H5P questions before we move on to the next concepts.